So this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. The recording of the meeting will remain online for 4 years, and if you are present in the chamber, you're consenting to appearing in the recording and broadcast, which may also be used for training purposes. Okay, let's got that out of the way. So, Lauren, looking over, we've got apologies. Can you tell us who we've got apologies from, please?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies today from Councillor Steph Chambers, and Councillor Patel is substituting for her. And I understand we have apologies from Councillor Bell with Councillor A. Chambers substituting for him. I'm not aware of any other apologies, Chair.
Okay, thanks a lot. Any other apologies? No, so welcome to Councillor Saj Patel as a substitute. Well done. And who's introducing declarations of interest? Get the agenda in front of me. Declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the last meeting. Everybody okay for me to sign them, please? Yep. Public question time. I see no public. Petitions and deputations, 0. Action point item. They're listed on 15 to 24 in the agenda papers. 15 to 24. No comments or questions? Nope. In that case, straight into the substantive items. Councillor Sawyer and Councillor, no, it's just you, Sarah, I think, isn't it? If you'd like to come and take the hot seat with your officer, be good. So, Sarah, are you happy to make a brief introduction? Is that okay, please? And then we'll take questions and comments. Thank you for coming. Okay, floor is yours.
Continue. So I will first set out what the Cabinet has been asked to approve at next week's meeting, and then I'll give a bit more background detail. So in November 2024, the Cabinet gave approval to undertake a review of the evidence to better understand the nature, extent and impact of HMOs in Gloucester. The review would also consider how statutory powers might be used to address these problems. We did this as we felt the housing stock survey did not give us all the information that we needed. This has now been completed, and the Cabinet have been asked to resolve that, subject to the consultation and publishing of statutory notices, a city-wide, all wards, additional licensing designation be made and applied to all HMOs. As well as this, a non-immediate Article 4 direction be made to the following wards: Kingsholm and Wootton, Westgate, Barton and Tredworth, Moorland, Kingsway and Elmbridge, to withdraw the permitted development rights to convert dwelling houses into houses of multiple occupation, and then authority to delegate decisions to the corporate director and head of place. So this evidence was gathered, that we've gathered, does show that in the wards mentioned, there is an oversaturation of HMOs and there are negative impacts on the local community. The evidence demonstrates that if the current trends continue in the absence of any additional controls, then the decline and impact demonstrated will only continue, and for these reasons, a greater degree of control is needed in Gloucester. There are many more HMOs in the city that we know about. I think in total, ARC have identified around 1,680, and 90% of these are located across these 6 wards. The Article 4 will be restricted to just those wards for now, which will mean that we are not stopping HMOs in the city, as we all know that we need these. Developers will now have the option to either apply for planning permission in these wards or develop in other wards. James has done a great job in setting up a mapping system that means we can now monitor all the other wards in the city, and if we feel they are becoming oversaturated, we can repeat this process. The Article 4 is non-immediate, which allows developers 12 months grace and is not backdated. The licensing can be backdated, so all HMOs will be licensed, and there are nearly about 1,000 of these, so this will generate good income to fund this project. Requiring the submission of a planning application for such proposals will now allow us to assess the effects of the proposed HMOs on an area's amenity. I just want to be clear that this is not a punishment for good landlords. Many HMOs in Gloucester are well managed and provide good homes for our residents. However, high concentration of poorly managed HMOs can present a challenge in sustaining mixed, balanced communities and can impact on the residential character and amenity of neighbourhoods. The work that is being done is to help to ensure that everyone who lives in a HMO has a decent standard of living, and we will now have the authority to enforce bad landlords. This is a great thing for Gloucester residents.
Thank you for that introduction. Does James want to add anything now, or just take questions later on? Okay, let's open it up to questions. Angela.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask, when we talk about HMOs, are you also including student houses? I know some student houses are HMOs, but some will be mixed. But are you, for the purposes of the report, including the two together?
Yeah, the report will be capturing all HMOs unless they're directly owned and managed by a university, and such as halls of residence, then they won't be licensable. But all traditional houses that are let under private tenancies would become licensable.
Yes, at the moment for large HMOs, we have rules about not having one private house sandwiched between two HMOs or more than two HMOs together. Will you be following that line elsewhere?
This will help us be able to implement the planning rules that are in the city plan, because before it was only HMOs that we knew about, but now we know about the other ones, so we can enforce that properly now.
And also, if a landlord is absent, a lot of them aren't living locally, some of them live abroad, you might have to deal with a management company. Will you have a mechanism for doing that? I get the impression some management companies really don't do what they're paid to do.
Yeah, so we would, as part of this process, we would be going out for statutory consultation where we would do a real thorough and wide engagement exercise with all of those operating in the sector, including managing agents, landlords, tenants and residents. We often do get landlords who live overseas, but the expectation is that if they do live overseas, they should have a management arrangements locally or nationally so that they can respond to emergency repairs. So we would try an effective engagement plan to engage those landlords. The legislation also allows us, though, for those that do not want to engage and want to remain hidden, we have really strong investigatory powers within the legislation that allows us to use enforcement notices and require information to be provided to us.
That one, we probably take Sarge Patel on the overseas people, and you say you have a good set of management things that you can use. Are you saying there that in most of those cases, which to us might seem impossible and difficult, you're able to use legislation and use your contacts and knowledge to find out who the actual owner is?
Yes, there's lots of powers that are already available to us to try and find out who an owner is. One of the challenges with overseas landlords is we have no jurisdiction overseas, but we would always try and engage with those landlords and use the powers that we have to bring them into the conversation to get their properties licensed. As part of the licensing element, we couldn't license a landlord overseas. The expectation is the law requires them to have a managing agent that is locally based and can respond to the licensing requirements and emergency repairs, whatever it may be.
It's really interesting and helpful, thank you. So Sarge Patel, then Terry Pullen, then Anne. Sarge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following up on the point regarding student houses, is that any student houses, or is it properties where there will be 4 students or more? So if there are properties which were semi-detached and there are 3 students there, would that still require a HMO as well? And then my other question for now is, what is going to be the, how much work is involved in setting up the team for this scheme, this project, and what is going to be the upfront costs? How much extra resources are going to be required, especially at a time when every team and department in the council are stretched to the limit. Thank you.
In response to the first part of your question, any property is let to 3 or more individuals as 2 or more households, so they're unrelated, be it a flat or be it a house, then it would require a licence. If there's 2 people, then that's a non-licensable property under the additional licensing requirements. With regards to setting up the scheme, the legislation and the licensing fee is to cover all of the elements, including the early stages of statutory consultation, the implementation and the operational period of up to 5 years for the licensing designation. So the fee revenue can be used to offset all of those costs, and we're doing the early stages now. The evidence has been done within existing budgets from a number of other projects. The other side of the revenue is looking at enforcement. So those landlords that don't license or fail to engage with us, we can actually use enforcement tools to go and prioritise proactive enforcement against those landlords, and then that could lead to further enforcement revenue as well to offset the cost of the scheme, but also to generate revenue to reinvest back into the service.
Just come back, Chair. I haven't actually had a figure. I would like a figure of what the cost is going to be for setting this up. I appreciate that further down the line that cost will be recouped from the fees. But for now, what is going to be cost? How many thousands of pounds is it going to cost? Thank you.
We will be producing a fees paper, which will be incorporating the fees and charges and the projected costs of starting up the scheme as well as delivering the scheme. So that paper will be following.
We're going to be setting up this scheme. We're going to have a team that's going to be set up to tackle these issues and get this implemented. How much money has got to be put aside to deliver this from day one? Thank you.
So at the moment, we've got the existing resources that we need to do this project. And then as income starts coming in and more applications come in, those future fees will then start. So we'll build up the team incrementally. So they'll start paying for the future costs. And so far to date, with the evidence-based phase, you've got a figure for that, haven't you?
Yeah, the evidence-based so far has cost us about £16,000. That's been done within the existing enforcement revenue that the private sector housing team already generates. We already operate a licensing scheme at the moment. So mandatory HMOs, we charge a £915 fee for the implementation of that, and we already have existing skills within the team to manage that. And as Councillor Sarah's just said, we will be implementing the growth as a phased approach. So as we receive those licence fees and licence applications, we'll then look to grow the team.
Thank you for the answers there. You say the existing team can deal with this. How big is the existing team, and which team is it you're talking about? Is it the existing enforcement team where there's a backlog of 85 planning enforcement team where there's a backlog of 85 cases at the moment, or maybe more by now? Or is it a different team, or is it a combination of officers from a variety of teams pulled together? Report, which it would have been really beneficial if some of these information would have been in the report. It would have saved me asking these questions.
The licensing will be delivered within the private sector housing team, which is part of the enforcement and regulation service. We have 6 full-time enforcement officers, a team leader and a HMO licensing officer already within that team, and we would look to grow that team if we were to be implementing this scheme.
On that, if I may, the report lists the you okay, Sarge? Lists a few recommendations that will be forwarded to Cabinet later, and I'm trying to find the right bullet point I was looking for. So one of the recommendations that Cabinet will be asked to resolve is agree the review of current policies, staffing resources and IT solutions for the delivery of the proposed schemes to ensure that the proposals are met by the revenue and income from the fees and charges for each proposal. So my question is pretty much the same as one to Sarge. So what do you estimate the setting up costs and being able to deliver the anticipated benefits from this scheme with new IT and new members of staff and all that kind of thing, if you don't know what income you have? Isn't there a bit of a gap there, a bit of a disconnect?
Well, we know.
Is there no figure, Sarah? Sorry.
Yeah, well, we know we're going to charge about £915 for licensing, and we know there's about 1,000 HMOs that will be needing to have a licence. So we've got that rough idea of how much money this is going to generate, and we know that that will cover the IT system upgrades that we need, and eventually it will cover the extra staff. So we know roughly how much resources we're going to need and how much income we're going to get. So we know that we've got enough money to cover it. Do you want to add anything to that?
We've already started to implement some of those IT transformational changes. So we've already moved from a paper-based system to an online system just to support the existing licensing scheme. So we've already absorbed some of those initial costs just by within the existing licensing framework for mandatory HMOs. But as Councillor Sawyer's just said, it was like,
I was going to say, there's not actually that much setting up costs.
no, is the setting up cost isn't the expensive part. It's actually, once we get the scheme up and running, it's around the enforcement side of it. It's going out and inspecting the properties to make sure they're safe and getting them licensed, and that's covered by the fee income. From previous experience in other authorities where I've delivered similar schemes, we normally get around a 75% early compliance rate. So we can actually model the income based on 75% compliance, which then enables us then to prioritise the enforcement side, which is looking at those remaining 25% that either don't want to license initially or actually just don't want to license at all. And that's where we focus that intelligence-led enforcement approach.
So, okay, we'll move on and I'll take the others in a minute. But just to be very clear on what you're saying, because I'm still not clear on what you are saying, to be honest. Don't mean to be disrespectful. But are you saying that the extra finance that you don't need any extra finance? Is that what you're saying? You've got the IT equipment, you've got the staff, you've got the resources from within existing resources. There's no additional expenditure required to get this scheme up and running. Is that what you're saying? Okay, that I understand that. I think members do. So it was Anne next. Sorry. Yeah, okay, let's just take Anne now, I've called her. Be a gentleman, then I'll come back over to you. No, Anne, please go. Please just get on with it.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased to see this. It's particularly useful because it meets a lot of things that and casework that's come through the ward. So I'm really pleased to see this. One of the queries that I've got is that it talks about conditions, that as this progresses, conditions can be placed on landlords in order to try and make things work more smoothly for residents. What are the sorts of conditions that might be placed on a landlord as part of this?
Some of the existing licence conditions are included in the report as part of the appendices. So in general approaches, what it can allow us to do is put a condition around the number of occupiers in the property to make sure it's safe and suitable for those number of tenants, so it reduces overcrowding and the impact that overcrowding can have on how that property is used and outwardly into the community. We can also put additional conditions around managing antisocial behaviour, so we can require specific steps to be taken if antisocial behaviour is reported to the council, and that can put the landlord on notice. And if they do breach those conditions and do not respond within some of those set standards that are within those conditions, then that can open up the opportunities for enforcement, such as reducing the licence term. So they may get a 5-year licence, that can be reduced to 1 year. They could also be exposed to the risk of a financial penalty, or in worst case scenarios, they could actually have the licence revoked and they could be deemed not fit and proper to be a licence holder. So it's about how they manage the tenancies as well as the health and safety elements of the property.
Thank you. So we've got the potential of a framework to say, look, we think this behaviour isn't working so well, to try and make things work as smooth as we can for all residents who are living within the houses of multiple occupation and those in the host communities around them. In terms of your experience of doing this previously, how effective has that actually been? The experience that I've had of where you have conditions, those conditions have to be drafted quite well and they have to be clearly understood, and then you need the evidence and then you need the enforcement. So I'm worried about being in a situation where residents are hopping up and down saying, it says in this document this shouldn't be happening, and nothing seems to happen. So I'd like a bit of assurance about the practical management of these conditions actually being put in practice.
As an example, without giving too many details away, we've already had 4 successful enforcement instances of serving financial penalties for a licensed landlord who's breached his existing licence conditions, and they could be quite heavy penalties that we've actually been successful and fully recovered those as well. So that's included reducing the licence term down from 5 years to 1 year, as well as financial penalties for each of those 4 separate offences for failing to comply with conditions of the licence.
Thank you. You've stolen one of my questions a little bit already, because it said in the report about landlords being a fit and proper, about sort of, and it made me think of licensing, where for taxi drivers you have to be a fit and proper person. What, in terms of this, what is a fit and proper landlord?
The Housing Act 2004 sets out the statutory definition of what a fit and proper person or landlord is, and that includes having previous convictions for a variety of different offences. It also includes contraventions, so where a landlord has breached one or more housing or public health legislations, such as a pest-infested property or failing to comply with health and safety standards, those can also be taken into consideration. Where Gloucester's been quite innovative for its existing licensing scheme is we also have introduced a person of concern test on top of the fit and proper person test. So rather it's not the statutory application of what's fit and proper, if we've got local cause of concern around how a landlord is managing his property or managing their tenancies or tenants in their property, we can also apply additional conditions to a licence rather than saying they're not fit and proper to be a licence holder. And we can also just grant them a 1-year licence straight from the beginning if we do have cause of concern. So we've got quite a robust policy and framework which sets out all the tests that determines fit and proper and cause of concern.
Lovely, thank you. One more, and then I shall let others have a go. Within my ward, a particular landlord who is known, who lives in Belgium, we think, who is owns quite a few houses in sort of the local area, works through a management company. If you fine him, let's say you find that his houses aren't as they should be for whatever reason, how will that work? Because of course they're outside of the UK. I know it was mentioned previously, but will you have any teeth in terms of that managing agents?
Yes, we would have to license the managing agent or a UK-based representative to be the licence holder, and they would be bound by exactly the same conditions as a landlord would have been if they were residing in the UK as well. One of the additional controls the legislation does put in place if we do have an overseas landlord and we're not satisfied that the management arrangements in the UK are satisfactory, we can do a management order, which means the local authority can apply to the tribunal to take full control of those properties away from that landlord for a period of up to 5 years. That does come with quite a lot of resource-intensive sort of approach, but normally we would always try and work with a landlord, with a property owner and with the managing agent, because it's about promoting that good relationship and that professional relationship. And the licensing conditions allows us to do that. It gives us that real tool to get behind the business and make sure we've got the right people who are managing that property and make sure all the standards are complied with.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Okay, thanks for being patient, Councillor Pullen. Over to you now.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I welcome this. This is really good that HMOs across the city, all HMOs, are going to be licensed. That's a good thing. Am I right that I heard that this is backdated to existing HMOs? It is. Right, okay. I wasn't sure about that myself, so that is even better then, isn't it? Excuse me, that those landlords and tenants out there are working together to provide good quality services. That's great. I'm a bit concerned, though, that there will be landlords who look for loopholes or don't comply, and some landlords will be, for want of a better term, driven underground, and there will still be HMOs operating without a licence. How are we going to identify those? Because, you know, there's probably quite a lot of work in that, and in honesty, for no income as well. Yeah, I mean, the income that we will get after of the houses that we know is great. But I'm concerned about that. As I said, an underground HMO sort of setup. How are we going to identify that, and what sanctions have we got once we've identified them? The other question on licensing is about consultation. Yeah, and you've talked about a broad consultation, which is absolutely great. Who are you going to consult? How are you going to consult? Over what sort of time period are you going to consult as well? Thank you.
Yeah, do the consultation part first. So yeah, it's a statutory consultation as well. The legislation and the guidance states it's got to be a minimum of 10 weeks, and that is an all-encompassing. So it's not just about consulting with landlords, it's about with residents, with tenants, with managing agents, with businesses, as well as with landlords. So I've carried out these consultations before, and they're a multi-channel consultation. So we're looking at digital, social media consultation, as well as workshops, hopefully to engage and set up workshop groups with relevant stakeholders, as well as directly going out and engaging directly to market. So we would probably deliver that through an independent third party, just to make sure there's that independent framework from there. So it'd be a minimum of 10 weeks, and it will be a all-encompassing sort of multi-channel consultation process, and then we will consider those responses. Oh, the underground landlords. Yes, there is always a part of the community, thankfully it's not a large one, that will always try and avoid these things. What we've done as part of the evidence-based gathering that's within the report is that we now have, for the first time ever, a really robust mapping data layer where we can keep refreshing that information and keep adding new data to it to identify those properties that we think might be HMOs. And if they're not licensed, we will then proactively target our enforcement work to target those properties, target those landlords. Some of the penalties for failing to license a property that requires to license is a financial penalty of up to £40,000 per offence. You can also look for rent repayment orders. So a landlord who does try to avoid licensing could be liable for a rent repayment order of up to 2 years. So if they do hide within the community and hide that property from us, we find that at some point that the enforcement tools and framework that supports us is quite robust and quite challenging for that landlord. And ultimately, we can, what I mentioned earlier, look at management orders. We can take control of that property away from that landlord, and that can include a banning order as well, which would stop them operating that in the rented sector, so they wouldn't be allowed to rent HMOs. So there's lots of options there, but again, it's all around the consultation. It's all around that engagement to really try and get as many landlords and managing agents compliant as we can, and then we can focus the enforcement resources to tackle those that just refuse to.
And just to reassure you, we're confident we're going to have the resources to do that, so that we can, yes.
Okay, that's very helpful. Just on the consultation, can the outputs and outcomes of those consultations come back to ONS for us to look at?
Delegated, but I'm sure we can share the finding of it because it is a public consultation. We have to consider those representations.
But that's a fair point, and we could put that as one of our recommendations to Cabinet, that as a scrutiny committee, we would like to see the result of the consultation before it goes on to the final Cabinet for approval.
Can I just add as well, it will be 2 separate consultations, one for the Article 4 direction from the planning side and one for the additional licensing. The Article 4 consultation is a much shorter period, and then the additional licensing is for a minimum of 10 weeks, but we can happily come back with the findings of those consultations.
So sorry to interrupt you, apologise. So Lauren, just make sure we've got that as one of our recommendations to the Cabinet. Thanks.
I have some more.
No, that's fine. Carry on.
Thank you. Thanks for that. That's very helpful. I spent all morning reading this report, so how sad is that? Okay, so we are going to introduce a planning application system for all HMOs, but not across the whole city. And I'm just concerned about having a 2-tier system. So in some areas you have planning permission, and other areas that you don't. Surely it would be better to have planning permission for HMOs across the whole city for simplicity.
That's certainly a consideration. The legislation around Article 4 directions and the planning framework is quite restrictive, and the guidance does stipulate that you should not be applying Article 4s as a blanket approach unless the evidence really strongly suggests that it's the appropriate power to do so. Looking at the evidence that we have to date, it clearly identifies those 6 wards that are most at risk and have an overproliferation of HMOs, and it's the most appropriate to do that in those wards for now. We can always revisit that decision, but the other thing is we don't want to stifle the HMO market. HMOs are an affordable and really important part of the housing offer that we have in Gloucester and across the country. So what we want to make sure is that we do promote them, well-managed, safe HMOs in other wards where they're perhaps not seeing the concentrations that we are in the 6 wards that the current Article 4 recommendations cover.
Okay. Final question, I promised, Chair. You used the word, your words, we don't want to stifle the growth of HMOs in this city. I have a concern, though, that particularly with planning, that may well deter new landlords from purchasing potential HMOs in the city. My concern is that if we cannot maintain our existing level of HMOs, let alone grow new ones, my concern is for the adverse effect that is likely to have on our housing and homelessness crisis, because a lot of people moving into HMOs are probably facing potential homelessness. It may well be people who are coming off the streets as a result of being homeless, and we need a strong and steady and quality, of course, HMO market. And I'm just worried that too many restrictions could reduce that. How will we know if what we're proposing is having a negative impact on HMO growth?
That's a very good question. The market forces in the housing sector, there's a number of different influences that can drive supply and demand of different housing. I think what I've experienced in other local authorities where we've delivered this before is actually we do not see a decline in the offer of HMOs. In fact, we sometimes see the opposite, where we see investment by professional landlords who actually see we want to offer a professional housing HMO offer to the city and to our residents who need it most. But I think it's a really important thing to take away, that actually we want to try and build in some form of measurement and monitoring so that we can continually review this. And what we would normally do as part of any of the data work that we do is review it every 12 months, just to see if we are seeing any trends or any changes in pattern. And for the first time ever, we have a really good baseline to start from, which we previously didn't have. So we can take that away and build that into the monitoring of the schemes if we do get them implemented.
Thank you.
We can obviously come back at some point in the future and give you updates on how it's going, and we can give you that kind of trend data so you can see what's happening.
Virtually everybody wants to speak, so I think it's Owen, and then Karen, and back to Sarge and you, and Angela, sorry, and you. I might as well just say everybody. Owen.
Shall I go first, though? Yeah. Thank you, Chair. You mentioned earlier what a fit and proper person is in terms of the landlords, but given that many residents in an HMO would not know each other and may be vulnerable, is there any way that we can encourage vetting of the residents themselves to ensure that the safeguarding of all the people that are in the HMO?
There is already a requirement for landlords to do some form of vetting through the right to rent checks and all of the checks that they should be doing at the start of any tenancy. But you're right, there's always been that disparity between the landlord's requirements to be on a HMO licence and to have that licence displayed in the common parts, but actually what's the similar offer for the tenants within that property. So some of the legislation that we do have can put conditions around how tenants behave in those properties, and we can support the landlord who's being a good landlord and has licensed their properties in dealing with tenants who are causing antisocial behaviour. So we're not just there as a reactive enforcement approach, we're also there as a supportive and engaging service as well to support them, because sometimes tenants can have a negative impact, especially if they're living in a property where they're unrelated and don't know the other tenants. Looking at the Renters' Rights Act that's coming in, that will also introduce a national database where tenants and members of the public can also access information about the landlord and about the property as well. So there's a bit of a two-way pathway where tenants will be able to choose perhaps the property that they want to move into and choose which landlord that they would like to be their landlord. But there is certainly work to be done, I think, with how do we better support landlords when there are troublesome tenants. And I think licensing does offer us a bit more of a framework there to support them.
Thank you. It also occurs to me that some people maybe, if they knew that a landlord required vetting, that might encourage them to want to live there because they will feel more secure. So while it may not be part of the legislation, some landlords might actually offer that as well.
Angela, then Karen, then Tree, and...
I think Liam wanted to talk as well.
Say again?
Liam.
I want to take the people who haven't spoken so far. So Angela, Karen, you haven't spoken so far. So let's say the people who haven't spoken before, unless you don't want to speak. Angela, do you want to speak?
Oh, I do want to speak.
Okay, go for it. Again.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, can we make sure that this new approach is really widely publicised so that everybody not only potential tenants and potential landlords and existing landlords and tenants, but also neighbours realise that we are tightening up on this because, as Councillor Radley has said earlier, possibly privately before this meeting, the distress caused to residents who see the degradation in their community. This will go a little way in making them feel better. I've had, as Councillor Radley's had, people say they're moving out, not just considering it, but people have moved out of my ward because of the effects. And the other thing is, a lot of the discomfort for residents is caused by sort of low-level aggravation. And one thing we have in my ward is bins being left out on the pavement, and I report them regularly. That's not the only thing. I mean, yesterday I reported 4 mattresses being fly tipped. They may not all have come from HMOs, I don't know, obviously. But it's that low-level irritation that also bothers residents. And how can you tighten up on that?
With regards to the publicity, we've already touched on the consultation period, which will be quite a broad-reaching engagement campaign, which will include publicity. Once we come to the decision of making any designations, there's also a statutory publicity period where we must put adverts in professional magazines, publications, newspapers. Within Article 4s, we must publicise the Article 4 within the wards and those areas affected as well. So part of the communications plan and strategy will encompass all of those elements. So we try and get that message as wide and loud and clear as possible so we get the best engagement through that. When we're looking at the issues that could potentially be coming from HMOs, such as bins and everything being left out, going back to the licence conditions, we can put specific conditions regarding how people manage wastes, the receptacles that are provided for waste, and complying with the waste presentation requirements. So we can use licensing conditions for that. But as we know, it's not always just HMOs that can cause issues with fly tipping or with bins being left out. So we've already got the existing powers within the Enforcement and Regulation Service that can deal with those community complaints. But when it comes to licensing, the conditions could be far more specific about specific elements like the waste receptacles and leaving waste out and leaving bins out when they shouldn't be.
Thanks, Angela. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just concerned, a bit like Councillor Pullen, about unintended consequences of this. While I think it's a good idea in principle, has there been any study done if you're licensing premises, you find out the landlord's not adhering to the licence, you go down the route of fining him, eventually you remove his licence. So what happens to the tenants living in that HMO at that point if it's no longer a licensed premise? Does that mean that they have to move out? What happens next?
No, the tenants are still protected under their rights as a tenant would be under the clauses of their tenancy agreement. With the Renters' Rights Act, there's even more protections coming in. So what would happen in the worst case scenario is if a landlord's not fit and proper, we would expect them to put arrangements in place that someone else would license to manage that property for them. Failing that again, then we do have the management orders where we would become the landlord, or we would procure a third party who would manage those properties and those tenancies, collect the rents and be responsible for any repairs, and we use the rent income to do that. So there are arrangements in place. What we would never want to do is encourage illegal evictions or encourage tenants to lose their tenancies just because the landlord's at fault. The blame doesn't sit with those tenants.
Okay, Tree and Liam.
Thank you. There's just a couple of points here, really. The first one I think maybe is an omission, I don't know, on the schedule of licence conditions. And a bit about carbon monoxide alarms. I don't know why this struck me so much, but it states that you need to ensure that a carbon monoxide alarm is installed in any room in the house which is wholly or partly used as living accommodation and contains a solid fuel burning combustion appliance. So that suggests things like coal fires, wood burners, that type of thing. It is my belief that also something that's at very high risk when it comes to carbon monoxide is faulty gas fires. It doesn't state here that if you have a gas fire in a room, you need a carbon monoxide alarm in there, which is not good.
No, we can take that away, amend those draft licence conditions, and what we try and do is make sure the language is compliant with the existing regulations and the wording of them. But you're right, it's any gas appliance in a property that has to be tested, such as a gas fire or gas hob or a boiler, as well as some of those solid fuel burning appliances as well, such as solid fires, coal fires, whatever they may be. So we can amend those conditions. At the moment, they're at that draft stage. And what's key of why they've been included at this stage is we would need to go out to consultation on those draft licence conditions, as well as the principles of what we're proposing. So we can always incorporate any amendments and any changes.
Okay, that's fantastic. My other question is on page 102 of the bit that I think is the licensing schedule, there's the bit about other statutory and legal requirements. Most of it seems to make quite a lot of sense, except it says that the licence is not evidence that a property is safe or free from hazards and defects. But if we are insisting that all these things are in place and it's being managed, the scheme is being managed properly, then surely it is evidence that it's free from hazard and defects, because that's surely part of the reason for licensing it, to make it safer for people and asking for all this information.
One of the nuances with licensing, be it HMO licensing or for non-HMO licensing, is that legislation is very clear. We cannot use licensing conditions to require a property to be free from Category 1 hazards. So another part of the Housing Act, Part 1 of the Housing Act, enables us to carry out enforcement inspections for up to 29 separate hazards in a property. That has its own set of provisions and enforcement that we need to carry out when we carry out an inspection of a property and find any issues. We can't use licensing to do the same thing. So licensing is around general property safety standards, tenancy management standards, and making sure that licence holders are fit and proper. We then use that to go and do inspections of those properties and then look for any of those 29 hazards I've just touched on, and then we take appropriate action under that part of the legislation. So it's just so they don't conflict together, but they do complement each other, and that's why we have to be a little bit limited with what a licence can put on as a condition for a landlord.
Okay, cheers, Tree. Liam.
You mentioned earlier about landlords could have a banning order put in place if they're prolific and causing lots of issues. Would that apply to just landlords that have HMOs? But if you have a landlord that has, say, one HMO and one family home, would that also ban them from being a landlord on any property?
So a banning order is probably one of the strongest enforcement tools that we have available to us, and that's applicable to any landlord, licensable or not, HMO or not, depending on their regulatory compliance history. So if we've had to inspect whatever property, a non-licensable HMO, and serve multiple enforcement notices and not got any levels of compliance, and then we get successful convictions for failing to comply with an enforcement notice, we can apply for a banning order. So that is across the board one of the tools that we have available to us, but we can also use it where we've witnessed failing to licence, for example, or a breach of licence conditions or multiple breaches of licence conditions.
Take people who haven't spoken before, Owen. So it's Councillor Alistair Chambers.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank you for, there's a member mentioned about mattresses being fly tipped. I won't go into the details because obviously it hasn't been released officially, but to you and your team for the capturing, I guess that's the word, of a prolific fly tipper in the area. So just thank you very much for that. That's fantastic. Yeah, the report's great. I've only got two very small questions. With regards to the Article 4 and the 6 areas that are going to have this requirement on them, is there a chance that this may push HMOs to other areas as a result? Thank you.
Yes, it may introduce like a drive of other HMOs into the other wards that aren't represented there. But the reason why those wards have been specifically identified for an Article 4 is that they've got such high intense use of HMOs we need to try and stop that as much as possible by using the planning framework. Now, that's not to say it'll be a no to HMOs in those 6 wards, but they must go through the planning process and apply some of the planning policy tests that Councillor Condor mentioned earlier. So the likelihood is, as we said, we don't want to stifle the offer of HMOs in the city. We want to promote them where it's suitable and appropriate. So there is a likelihood you might get more investment in other wards where there's lower numbers currently.
Just to add to that, they will need to be licensed, so we will be able to know how many are going into these other wards. And we've got the mapping tools now, so we can see what impacts that's having, and we can monitor it live, can't we? So if we do see that there's other problems occurring, we can act quickly.
Thank you. I've got another question after, but this is just a supplementary to that. Which wards are predicted to see an increase? Have you looked at? And will this have an intended pressure on housing supply elsewhere?
Yeah, we don't know which wards. I mean, there is data on each ward and existing levels of HMOs that we've mapped and identified in each of those wards. Those 6 wards are just the ones that have reached that tipping point, as we call it, where we've got such high numbers that's appropriate to apply those restrictions. And as Councillor Sawyer just mentioned, these schemes just to complement each other. They're not done in isolation. So licensing the HMOs enables us to know where they are, and we can map them, and then we can apply the appropriate planning tests when they look to make a planning application. So we'll have much more knowledge and enriched data around those decision making around the planning applications.
Thank you. Last question. Regarding success and how will you know this has worked? So the question is, what does success objectively look like? Year 1, 2, and say years 1 to 5. And will the metrics be publicly reported afterwards? Thanks.
I guess success is that we get every HMO licence to the city. That's the key success, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's about getting them licensed, getting them inspected, making sure we know that those properties are in safe and in a good condition. But also the other side is it's about, you know, we want to work with the sector. We want those good landlords. We want to promote good landlords and that good housing offer. Success also looks like targeting those rogue landlords, those ones that don't want to license, the ones that manage poor quality properties, overcrowded properties. We want to drive them out of the sector where we can, or bring them into a period of improvement. We want to drive up their standards of if we have. So I think that's what success looks like. One, getting properties licensed, but making sure we tackle those that aren't licensing, the ones that are really causing an impact to our tenants and to our residents, to make sure all of those properties end up being well managed and safe.
Thank you. That's all my questions. Thanks for the excellent report and very, very thorough answers.
And if I can just follow on from that, this is stating the blindingly obvious. This is the Scrutiny Committee. So don't take our questions and our scrutiny as anything other than joint partnership working with you and your team and your portfolio. We don't come here just to pick holes and criticise. We try to do what it says on the tin. Okay, thanks. So, Alwyn, you wanted to come back?
Yes, yes, thank you, Chair. You mentioned that enforcement could include banning orders. Is there then a risk of residents becoming homeless at that point, or are there protections for the residents if there's a landlord that we no longer want to license?
Yeah, the same protections would apply whilst a said individual, and this is the worst case scenario, if a said individual has a banning order, the courts would require them that they cannot operate or be involved with the operation of any rental properties at all. But what it does mean is that we could step in looking at interim management orders, final management orders, so we could either work with a third party to offer that service, but tenants would not be at risk of eviction. In fact, we're protecting them from those individuals. So yeah, we would always want to prevent homelessness at every opportunity, and we would work with the sector to make sure that any properties where a landlord was subject to a banning order was supported through a third party managing agent so that we could continue to retain those tenancies. But it's just making sure that, you know, criminality doesn't pay. We don't want individuals to be able to keep getting away with it.
Thank you, that's very reassuring.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on that because it's similar to the question that I asked. So if they're banned, what if they want to then sell their property? Or is that property then taken off them because of the banning order?
Very good question. I will have to take that away and dig into the legal tests around what would happen next if it got to that situation. But to be honest, that is a last resort. We would want to do everything we could to work with those individuals, get those individuals to improve and make sure they do become compliant. So, but I can dig some research and come back to you.
Saj Patel.
Thank you. Can I just also add that the report's extremely comprehensive, and it's really good to see that, and the amount of information in there, it's relevant. Couple of questions with the HMOs when we get the scheme up and running, or even the existing schemes. Presumably, an officer has to visit and we carry out inspections. So if the scheme was rolled out, how 1,680 HMOs would need inspections, or would they not? And if so, how many officers would that take? How many officers would it take each day to be out there inspecting the properties over a course of a year or 2 years? It's going to take some time. You know, if we did 6 properties a day, it's going to take quite a significant amount of time and resource. So, again, you're telling me that we have the resource in the private sector housing team, and I've had some involvement with them when I've reported issues, and they've been really helpful, extremely helpful. But can they deliver? How many extra officers are we going to need to carry out those inspections? And are they annual inspections? Because I've no idea about HMOs, probably like many of us here. How many inspections would be required? Would it be annual, or would it be every 5 years, or would it be as and when some issues arise with complaints coming? That's the first question. I'm also concerned about the issues around homelessness, potential issues around homelessness. We talked about banning landlords, rogue landlords. What about where properties may be condemned because they are so bad? At that point, any tenants in there would have to be removed immediately for their own safety. So presumably they would have to be put up in a hotel or a B&B. And who would be liable for the cost of that? Would it be the council, or would it be the landlord? And another question is, my ward is one of the most populated ward in the whole city, and it also has a very high percentage of rental properties. I think I read in the report 52% of rental properties. Now, I don't know what the percentage is in comparison with private rental and HMOs. I think there's probably far more private rentals. Is it HMOs that are the problem in terms of, you know, someone talked about mattresses and a few other issues, or is that our private rental housing problem? Are we assuming, making assumptions here that HMOs are the issues, when potentially I could be saying, well, we got a flighting problem on the corner of High Street, but there are no HMOs there. There'd be private rentals there, but not HMOs. So that was the other question. And just to give you an example, concerns around resource, a resident sent an email to the council. He contacted me. I told him to send an email through because a tenant in a private rental house was throwing buckets of water, but it wasn't just water. I think there were chemicals in there. Straight outside the window, out through the window. They got no front garden. So if there was any pedestrians walking past, it would land on them, and it was landing on their cars, parked cars. So I asked him to email it through to the council. He did, and the reply from the council was to ask me to tell the resident to go online and report it to the police. Now, I would have thought something of that nature, something so serious and concerning, would have been dealt with by the council's private housing team or the council. So what I'm concerned about there is, if we don't have the resource, are we going to be pushing complaints back to the police or other agencies? Does that make sense? Thank you.
Our best just to remind us if we've forgotten something. So, should we work backwards? Do you want to do the last question about the house?
For that specific one, if you want to give me the details, I'll take that away and find out who would have been the most appropriate team or service to pick up that type of complaint. Because no matter what, if it's not for private sector housing or the enforcement and regulation team, we'll make sure it gets to the right team or appropriate agency or partner that it should be for. Then working back, so, and sorry if this is not in the right order. So you're right, we're doing the inspections. We want to be light touch as possible for good compliant landlords. But we do have a duty to inspect within 5 years. It's not every year, so once every 5 years. We'll be prioritising that focused inspection approach with those that don't licence or those that we think have a significant risk, and then we will be inspecting the lighter touch ones towards the end of the scheme. But once we're generating the fee income, we would then be prioritising some growth in service to encourage new private sector housing officers to go out and do those inspections once the scheme's up and running. With regards to numbers, it depends on how many officers we are and how many licensed and how many don't license to what those numbers of officers, but we do expect some form of growth. It could be 3 officers, it could be 5 officers initially to make sure we target the worst first and make sure we do a light touch for those compliant landlords, the good landlords that we want to work with. Can you refresh us on some of the other questions?
Oh, yeah, what if that?
Condemned properties, I mean, we deal with condemned properties every day anyway. Licensing is not going to change that fact. It's very rare that we would condemn a property. The powers that we have is always about working with the landlord to get that property up to a safe standard. And sometimes that can be done whilst the tenant's in property. It's only in very extreme circumstances we'd issue perhaps a prohibition order where that property is so unsafe, or perhaps the works that are required to make that property safe can't be done whilst there's tenants in situ. It's the landlord's responsibility to house those tenants unless it's an emergency, when we would automatically trigger potentially putting them up into temporary accommodation. But then we would always work with trying to recover those costs from the landlord. But those powers are available to us already, with or without licensing.
Thank you for the answers, really reassuring, and your knowledge as well.
Actually, Sarge, coming back to you as well, one of your points was around the data and the correlations, I think.
Oh, yeah, between them.
So looking at the main report that's in one of the appendices, because the report only covers some of the highlight information from that, we did do correlations both for social housing, general private rented housing and HMOs. We didn't find a strong correlation when we looked at social renting or just private rented accommodation that were non-HMOs. But when we applied the same tests around the number of incidences with HMOs, we did find a statistically strong correlation. So we did apply the test across all of 10 years, and it was HMOs that stood out where there was a positive relationship between community complaints and the density and numbers of HMOs within each of the wards. And we actually went down to a local super output area as well, not just at a ward level. So we really did drill down into that data. It's just we couldn't present all of it in the report.
We've given you a run for your money, but it continues. Louise.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd also just like to add my thanks for the very comprehensive report. I was just wondering, assuming this all goes ahead and you get the licensing scheme in place, would there be a sort of a register that councillors could consult if, say, a resident flags up to me, I think this is an unlicensed HMO, or would it be a case of me just notifying you, waiting for a response, and if so, what do you think the timescale involved in that would be, please?
So there's a statutory requirement to have a public register of all licensed properties. So as soon as an application is made and we've processed that licence to a final stage, there'll be a public register, and that will be available on our website. We've actually procured, as part of those IT solutions, public access portals similar to the planning portal, so that anyone would be able to view when an application has been submitted. So it's good for a tenant to know, actually, has my landlord submitted an application to be licensed, or actually is it already licensed? That register includes information around who the licence holder is, who the managing agent is, if there is one, and the number of people that that property is licensed for. What it does, by its very exemption of a property not being on there, if someone has concerns around a property and they say, actually, my neighbouring property's got 5 or 4 individuals in there, and they check the register and it's not there, then they can report it through to Here to Help or through the normal complaints process, and then we'll pick that up as part of our ongoing investigations.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
So I think we're all questioned out, aren't we? Oh, we're not. I'm not going to say that because it just tempts fate. Anne.
Thank you, Chair. You've touched on this a little bit already, but what are going to be the overall savings of this? If you've had any chance to try and calculate or think of that, because we're going to improve the quality and the relationships between people. So we're going to have better places for people to live, happier, healthier communities. I was wondering if any work has been done around the officer time that's going to be saved, because we're not having to chase bins because they've been put out nicely. We're not going to necessarily have to have people out looking at all the cars that are being parked in strange and weird ways. Any of the anticipated improvements in the way that these properties will now operate, have you had any chance to try and put a number against that?
No, we haven't, because we've never done a scheme like this before. But I think what it does do, it gives us the opportunity to be able to revisit that question. The designation for the additional licensing is only for up to 5 years. And at the end of that 5-year period, that will really give us an opportunity to review all of that information. I think what's really important is we're currently a reactive service. We get 700 to 900 complaints coming into the private sector housing team at the moment, and we're only able to respond to those. This enables us to come from a proactive approach to really target and be more effective and efficient with our resources and how we target those enforcement activities where we need to. But I think part of that review towards the end of the designation is going to be really important to look at the successes, perhaps some of the learning from it as well, because it may not all be successful, but I think predominantly we'll have a lot of learning to take from it, and we can come back with a report to see what we have realised as outcomes from the scheme.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Angela, and we'll start to
Thank
make
you, Chair.
progress.
I hope people don't think that we're dissing landlords at the exclusion of other people, because we also need to educate tenants into, when they're students, how to deal with their rubbish. And I know that I think the Ubico team have done some work in part of my ward, and when I reported problems, they said, oh, we hope it's not in this particular road because we've worked really hard to educate people. But of course, with students, you get a turnover every 12 months, so they have to be it's a new batch. They have to be re-educated, and non-students also. So I hope that, the messages emanate and get to everybody that needs to get to. Thank you.
How do you work with the private landlords themselves? How do you ensure that they're up to speed on legislation, work with them to address issues that might be causing you to have serious issues with them? Is it a good relationship?
I think this offers us the first opportunity to actually build that relationship with the landlord community in a much, much wider way, perhaps offering up a landlord forum, which previously doesn't, to my awareness, doesn't actually exist in Gloucester at the moment. So it really gives us an opportunity to have that open communication with landlords and managing agents. Also, with regards to licensing, we'll actually know who they are, how to contact them and how to share information with them. The recommendations of this report also complements the wider Renters' Rights Act that's coming in this year, which will, some of those elements come live from the 1st of May next year, and then towards the end of next year in October with the Landlords Database. So it really gives us an opportunity to start really engaging with the sector that actually we don't really have that engagement framework at the moment. But licensing will enable us to be able to reach out, contact them, know who to contact and share all of that information. We'll also be doing a lot of work with the website, a lot of information and how that information is available to all of the stakeholders, not just landlords, agents and tenants as well. So it gives a real opportunity to build much better relationships with the landlord community.
It's really good news, because we don't want the landlords to pull out of Gloucester. They feel the need, and most of them are law abiding and all the rest of it. So if we can strengthen our relationships with them, that's good. We've all, in different ways, mostly in terms of knocking on doors in elections, done public consultation exercises. But engaging with people in HMOs is going to be slightly more difficult than normal engagement and consultation. Do you have any ideas, any thoughts on how you can manage that consultation exercise when it comes to working with people who are living in HMOs and getting their views on what your report says, what the plans are and what the Cabinet's got in mind for them? Because I think the term in the past might have been hard to reach, but not hard to reach, just take a bit of effort. So I just wondered what your thoughts on that word to ensure that we actually capture the thoughts and the views of the people who were seeking to help, if that makes sense. Hope it does.
It's always a challenge to try and engage with everyone and reach everyone with that message of come and talk to us and listen to our consultation and be part of that consultation. Whilst the report doesn't show you where those properties are, we know where every single property is. We can actually do direct engagement with those 1,680 properties, but what we don't want to do is just focus the communications approach with just those properties. We want it to be more all-encompassing. So one example of really good engagement is actually sending out some information on the fly with the council tax bill. That goes out early next year, so that goes through the door of every property. It's also about working with community groups, doing social media and publicity, working with the university, working with managing agents. We have to be as far-reaching as possible to make sure it's an effective engagement exercise. What we don't want to do is fall foul of a poor consultation exercise and then put ourselves at any risk of challenge. But we do know where these properties are. We can actually do direct engagement with those properties through written form, sending letters or flyers and information through the letterbox. We'll also do publicity as well in local newspapers and websites.
Yeah, you'll be in touch with councillors for the wards involved, like Sarge Patel and his colleagues across the city. That would be a really good way of getting information out to the people in HMOs. So, Sarge, did you want to speak? You want to add something?
Just had another question regarding the consultation. I'm sure other members have noticed that as well when we're at knocking on doors and canvassing. We go to properties which we know are rental properties, like HMOs, properties that have been converted into flats. When you go downstairs and you just see a whole pile of envelopes, they never get opened. You go there 6 months later and the pile will be even bigger. So we can't be certain, we can't guarantee that those landlords will all receive those letters or open them and read them and take any notice. So are there any other ways where we are going to engage proactively with these landlords? And I think it's imperative that we do work with these landlords. There are a lot of good landlords, but there are also some who are all they're interested in is their money. That's it. They don't care about the impact the tenants have on the neighbours, on the local area because they don't live in the area. So all they care about is a financial incentive. I mean, I got contacted by a constituent whose next door neighbour's property is a student house, and they are often having parties there, loud music into the night, and he's even received racist threats from the tenants, from the students actually. So he's engaging with the landlord directly. In my street, there's a student house, and they often leave their wheelie bin outside. I've got hold of the landlord's number, and I just send him a photograph, so can you sort this out? And he sorts it out. But we shouldn't have to keep doing that. So a HMO database, a HMO license would make sure, hopefully, that they will be more proactive and engage with us and the local community as well.
Okay, I think that just wraps it up. I think that's probably a good point on which to end the meeting. Unless I will tell you, I'm not getting anybody indicating that they want to speak. So I think to both of you, thank you for your patience, thank you for your courtesy, thank you for your detailed answers. And like I said, we're doing what it says on the tin, scrutinising. It's a compliment to you guys that there's only one minor recommendation that we're forwarding on to the Cabinet, and that's to ensure that you guys come back to us after the consultation exercise. So, sorry, I'm being prompted that I've got something wrong.
Just to be clear, if I understand it correctly, the recommendations in the report are to delegate authority to take this forward subject to the consultation. So there is not an intention to bring back another report to Cabinet.
No, but this is going to Cabinet.
Yes.
So I think in our recommendations to Cabinet, we're saying that we would like Cabinet to take note of the fact that as an ONS committee, we would like to have the results of the consultation exercise that you carry out, that is carried out. But That's okay, isn't it?
So the recommendation is fine, it doesn't change, but what's before the Cabinet will be to agree to proceed with this, subject to the consultation, affirming what is in the research that has already been done. I think the results of the consultation could be circulated to the committee or reported as part of the next stage of reviewing that when they're reviewing what's implemented.
Yeah, that's fine. Whatever the wording takes to get it right, that's fine. They're usually pretty good at accommodating that. So, Sarge, oh wow. Okay, fine. Okay, cool.
Yeah, we're always happy to come back and present things, aren't we? We want to be as open as
Okay.
possible.
We've just got one more recommendation coming from Councillor Patel.
Thanks. If the committee agrees, perhaps when this scheme is rolled out, effective from April, I think, this year, or next year, sorry, 12 months down the line, perhaps we could have a report come back to the committee to look at how it's been rolled out, if there's any teething problems, any issues, resource, etc. as well. Thank you.
Just thinking around the timescales, if Cabinet resolves us to go out for a consultation on the recommendations, there's different timescales for those consultations. The earliest opportunity the consultation might close would be April. Then we have a 3-month statutory publicity and lead-in period. So the designation wouldn't necessarily go live probably till June, July, but we can start accepting applications, but happy to come back, one, with the findings of the consultation as part of that transparency and sharing the findings and recommendations of the consultation, as well as once we get the scheme up and running, which, like I said, it's probably be around July at the earliest. And then with the Article 4, that won't be until 2027 because there's a 12-month lead-in period as the non-immediate Article 4 implementation.
I'm frightened to say that just about wraps it up. But thank you from all of us for what you're doing to try and improve the quality of life for a lot of people who need some help. And that's good news. That's why we're all here, regardless of our politics. So thanks a lot.
And I just want to say that James is an amazing officer.
Sure.
And this is going to go well. I know it's going to be a success because James and his team are brilliant.
Sure, it's really good news. Thank you. Okay, well done. See you in 18 months' time. Okay. You've been on. So I think the next team have settled into that. Well, I thought they'd settled in, Councillor, into their places. So Ruth and Luke, I think it's fair to say we've all read the report 2 or 3 times. Are there any headlines you'd just like to give us, Luke or Ruth?
Yes, no, I'm pleased to introduce the Gloucestershire Housing Partnership report. For the Cabinet Member for Community Engagement couldn't be here, so you do have me. The report outlines the role of the City Council plays as the host authority, which brings together housing, health and partners across the county to improve outcomes for residents on 2 main key work streams. Those are rough sleeping and domestic abuse, where a county-wide approach ensures efficiencies and best practice. The report also sets out the governance arrangements, the funding model, the delegated authority needed to continue delivering these services and contracts. I welcome any questions.
Yeah, cheers, thank you. Any comments, questions? Anne, the sole hand.
I don't mind waiting if there's a queue, Chair. So I was skimming through and I didn't think I had any questions. And then I was looking at it and I thought, oh, what does this actually mean? So I was looking on page 106 and it talks a little bit about achieving and encouraging high energy efficiency in new build houses and then best use of existing houses. Could you tell me a little bit more about what's meant in terms of best use?
So, I mean, I think the opportunity to improve the housing stock that we have and to make sure it's as adaptable as possible. So one of the things that does feed into the Housing Partnership Board is disabled facilities grants, for example. So improving accessibility, making sure that homes can be homes for life for individuals. So, and kind of responding to specific physical needs to make sure that people don't have to move house, that they're able to, live in their home for longer, should that be, the issues that they have. We've also carried out county-wide stock condition surveys so that we understand what the stock looks like and what the stock is. And obviously that helps us then think about how that stock might be improved. We've done multiple schemes around things like energy efficiency, providing grants to individuals to improve the energy efficiency of their own homes. So schemes such as Warm and Well, for example, was one that was kind of supported by the Housing Partnership. There were a couple of schemes that happened in the Forest of Dean, which were called Warmth on Prescription, so for people with, significant health issues. So, yeah, it manifests in multiple ways, but I do recognise that it probably sounds a bit vague and abstract in that point. That was probably because we were trying to come up with a coverall, so thanks for the question.
Thank you. And another bit that confused me a little bit, again, in those bullet points, was achieve recognition for innovative and best practice. Who does that actually help?
I think it does help if residents have confidence in the system. So, and I think recognition for good practice, I think, does encourage residents to have confidence in the system. I think, when there are issues in the system, I think it puts people off asking for help. So, I think for quite a long time, Gloucestershire Housing Partnership was recognised as being a really pioneering way of working together. For a load of districts within a county, and we were kind of recognised nationally by partners that wanted to know how we were doing it and whether they could do it as well. So I think the system that we use is being replicated in more places now, because for housing it's a way of working that absolutely makes sense. So I think having that recognition and having that confidence from partners in other areas, and being able to say these are some of the great things we're doing, I think it does, for some residents it does build that confidence.
So it's more about sharing your best practice and recognising that what you're doing is of high quality, because it did feel a little bit sort of, hang on a minute, why are you wasting public money on saying how good you are at doing your own job? So thank you for clarifying that.
Comment? Do you want to comment? Does it need a comment, councillor?
No, I think I've made the comment and I had an answer, which I'm very grateful for. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Puller and then Councillor Chambers.
Thank you. But it is good to know that we are pioneering this work and other people are learning as a result of the work that's being done by Gloucester City on behalf of Gloucestershire. So thank you for that. What's actually new in this report? Because it seems to me this is a continuation of an awful lot of work that is already going on and is being quite established. I mean, I know it's principally around rough sleeping and domestic abuse, but is there anything new in here that you'd like to draw our attention to that isn't already ongoing?
So no, there isn't anything new in here. So a lot of this has been going on for quite a long time. So the housing partnerships existed since 2017 and the team has been managed by Gloucester City Council since 2019. We've never actually bought a public report where it's all been in one, which has explained how it works and why. And also the fact that we do contract on behalf of others. There's been little bits of delegated authority in other reports, but it's never been kind of highlighted in one document that just kind of adds that level of transparency, I suppose, not just for us, but for our partners as well. So yeah, it is a bit of a consolidation report, I think, more than anything else.
Thank you. I see that you've got a team of 5 people. I assume that they are all funded by different partners, although obviously because some of the issues are in Gloucester, we fund some of those posts, but certainly not all of them.
So the 5 posts you're referring to are partnership funded posts. So all of the partners, which is all of the councils, the ICB and the Police and Crime Commissioner, all fund those. Those posts specifically are sort of coordinators. So you've got like a rough sleeper coordinator, you've got the domestic abuse coordinators, and largely they look at the contract management. So there are more staff that might be through like the outreach service, but the ones directly employed by us is within that partnership.
That's really helpful because, as I said, there are the 2 main work streams, but then I read somewhere that you've got 10 contracts, and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, we've got 5 staff doing, what did I say, 10 contracts across 2? Okay, so those are, if you like, they're an overview sort of role. So one assumes that because this is county-wide work, there are, not everybody can be based in Gloucester. So, we've got people from Lydney up to, I don't know, Letchlade or whatever. There are people working within communities, though, are there? Surely not just based in Gloucester.
Yes. So if we sort of take the contracts for an example, I suppose, and the rough sleeping Julian House contract, that's sort of split into 2. So within that 10-ish contracts, they can be sort of delved in. So yeah, so you have the urban that are doing the rough sleeping in the urban areas, which is completely different to rural areas. So those 2 contracts have sort of been split out. The contracts and the staff also include sort of the SWEP provision, includes sort of direct access, which is run through P3, the NSAP, which is next step accommodation, and that's for sort of low to medium support of those people that don't trigger the higher threshold of start, and CHIPS, which is mental health and substance use service for rough sleepers, sort of sanctuary scheme for domestic abuse, some respite rooms in different areas, which I think is just being explored at the moment. So it's sort of it's a broad range across the county, not just sort of Gloucester specific.
Okay. Anybody else?
Tanya just wanted to say something.
Ruth.
Sorry, I was just going to add about how the directly employed team themselves work. So they are hosted by Gloucester City Council, but for relationship building purposes, they do try and work from all of the other districts as well to make sure that they understand different ways of working. So I think that's really helpful. They can work from home as well, so they've got that flexibility of how they deliver the job across, so we've got a manager, an assistant manager, 2 coordinators and a project support officer, and their role is mainly to manage all the contracts. And obviously then the people that are working in the services are generally service-based, depending on the location.
Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Chair. The out-of-hours homeless rough sleeper telephone number was originally county out-of-hours, I think. It's gone back to city. Is that correct, or am I mistaken? Or is it with city now, just with city?
No, so there was a slightly different arrangement through the county council, but now it's a shared service. So a number of districts are all signed up to the same service to make sure that people are housed as quickly as possible through the out of hours should they need to be. So it's a slightly different arrangement.
The reason I ask is if it's still under county, I was going to say it needs a big complaint going through. I'll give you a really quick background, just my question. So I was in McDonald's Eastern Avenue and there's a homeless chap there. I was speaking to him and he had nowhere to stay for the night. He didn't have a mobile number and obviously no fixed abode, no house or home. I had to call through to the out-of-hours team, which is an automated service. And I called through about 3 or 4 times, and each time it got my name wrong, my number wrong, my details wrong, to the point where if it's somebody vulnerable, they would have just hung up. So I called back probably the 5th or 6th time. I finally went through with the name Gertrude from Glasgow, because that's what they'd accept. So they answered the phone and they asked for his telephone number. He hasn't got one. Then they asked for his home address. He's homeless. He hasn't got one. And then they couldn't help. They couldn't do anything. So I think that service really needs an urgent looking at. Is that something you could take away, please, and have a look at? Thank you.
I think if councillors have poor experience of council services, they need to file a complaint as soon as possible with as much information as possible so we can follow up with that contract and that contractor to make sure the quality is improved. You know, without any details, I can't take that away and promise that we can make improvements, but definitely happy to deal with it if you want to provide more information.
You can give me the complete details later, that'd be fantastic. So questions about the paper. How much does Gloucester receive financially to manage this work on the housing partnership? Thanks.
So we don't receive anything to manage this work. So Gloucester City Council our housing need is the greatest out of all of the districts. So our role to manage the team is because housing is really important on our priorities list. So we don't lose any money through managing that team because the external funding and partner contributions cover all of the costs. So we as a partner make similar contributions, but we don't make any money out of hosting this team on behalf of our partners.
How are strategies and decisions made, and how much weight does each authority hold when making decisions for the Gloucestershire Housing Partnership?
Shall I carry on? So there aren't actually any strategies that the team themselves hold. So the Gloucestershire Domestic Abuse Strategy, Councillor Trimnell took a decision on that a couple of weeks ago, or I think actually this week, or no, last week, and the call-ins just ended, to adopt the county-wide domestic abuse strategy following a needs assessment and a partnership review of the existing strategy. So usually strategies are developed by either the district, so Gloucester City, for example, would develop our own homelessness strategy or our own housing strategy, but we would use information and contract information managed by the team to inform our local strategies. So all of the districts would likely have their own strategies unless it was a county-wide. So the county have responsibility under the Domestic Abuse Act. For domestic abuse, we have housing responsibilities under the Domestic Abuse Act, but the county is the lead partner are responsible for developing that strategy. So they've done that and we've then adopted, and that is what the team will then work to as a county-wide strategy. So I hope that answered your question.
It does, thank you. I've got two last really quick fire questions. Is there enough money to ensure that this work is being done adequately?
I think there's never enough money in the system for high demand services. I mean, I think it's really difficult when you've got people managing contracts, because if a contract's working really well, then they won't need to put much effort into it. But if a contract isn't working very well, then all of a sudden they'll have to put a lot of effort into trying to improve it. And obviously doing that in partnership. So I think one of the things that's most demanding about the work is, you know, working in partnership with lots of different districts that have varying priorities in terms of the work that they're doing. So, you know, I think there are times where the team are under pressure and it probably feels like we need more, you know, we need twice as many, but there are also times where the pressure is less and the contracts are working well. So I think, you know, one of the reasons for bringing this report forward now is because we're about to go through a huge piece of recommissioning across all of our contracts to make sure there is no gap in service in advance of local government reorganisation. So the last thing we want is contracts to end 6 months before a new organisation and for no providers to want to enter into a 6-month contract, because obviously it's just not worth their while. So, you know, there is going to be a lot of work to do, and we're planning it now to make sure that we can phase it over the next 2 years. So I think it's, you know, sometimes how it's managed, there are always peak periods of pressure. Yeah, we do the best we can within the resources we've got to manage that.
Can I add that all the partners contribute a part of their RSI funding, the Rough Sleeper, I think it's Rough Sleeper Initiative funding, and also domestic abuse funding. The government is currently reviewing their sort of funding model. So from homelessness perspective, they're looking at pushing it into a 3-year funding package, which will safeguard it into the future even more.
Thank you. It's my last question now. We've had issues in the past with poor contract management. What lessons have been learned, and what are the changes that you've made to ensure that the same issues do not arise again?
So this team haven't ever had issues with contract management, and I think because they're accountable to a large number of partners, I think their contract management approach is really robust. I think one thing that I would say is that some of our contractors have never been contract managed in the way that we contract manage them. And I think they weren't necessarily expecting to be contract managed against the contract so robustly, I think, which does say a little bit about, you know, local government in other areas as well. But our contract management through this team is very robust and very regular. We've got, as you will see from the diagram in the report, we've got a programme management group that reviews the data quarterly from all of the contracts to make sure that any partner has the opportunity to raise concerns about what's happening. So I think that partnership approach to contract management raises the level of accountability as well.
Just supplementary that's come off the back of that, I just need to ask. Yeah, you said you've never had issues with contracts before. That said, P3 were removed quite quickly, officer delegated decision on the 13th of December, was a decision you'd made. And then John House, was it John House or Julian House, was instructed instead. Was that a contract issue for their removal?
So P3 weren't removed. P3 worked in Gloucester City for many years and across the county. Their contract came to an end, and through a recommissioning process, they weren't successful. Julian House was successful, so they won the contract. So they weren't removed. Their contract came to a natural end, and they were given notice accordingly.
Any questions or comments? Yeah, okay, all right. And then Sarge, and then me. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
And I.
I just wanted to ask how the 9 partners oversee the work of the partnership.
So on the report on 3.8, there's the governance structure, which sort of shows how it feeds through from sort of oversight up into the Housing Partnership Management Board.
That structure is, sorry to jump in, Alwyn, where's the involvement of elected members?
So there's a few ways that elected members are involved. So one of the agreements that the partnership made quite early on was that the partnership team of 5 people cannot be briefing 7 sets of members because they would, you know, there would never be any agreement. So the idea is, and particularly through the...
There wouldn't be any agreement with whom, sorry?
So if the partnership team had to brief 7 sets of members, then that would be a full-time job for most of the decision-making that needs to happen in the partnership. So the way it works is through the oversight group, every district is represented and briefs their cabinet leads through that process and then negotiates for any changes or, you know, make sure that their district needs or their organisational needs are represented in the work that's going on. So we've also got a responsibility to the Health and Wellbeing Board, so which is chaired by a member in the County Council, so we report into that. There is also feed into Leadership Gloucestershire, where obviously all of the leaders and chief execs of all of the districts feed in. So there are a number of ways that accountability, democratic accountability happens, but it isn't through regular briefing from the partnership team. So in fact, the partnership team have very little involvement with elected members themselves. So I hope that makes sense.
With all our partners, 10 partners, how do we scrutinise each other? How does that happen? And in the last 2 years, would you be able to list me 5 issues that have been identified by any of the partners about problems which have been, identified by one of the other partners? So, for example, Gloucester City Council have identified something with P3 or vice versa or whatever. Because otherwise, if we're not looking at each other properly and we're just working in partnership, everyone's just looking after their bit and everything's all hunky-dory. And they'll just carry on and people will just plod along, business as usual. So have there been issues that have been spotted? and dealt with to sort of reassure the members here that it is working very well and it is working cohesively and in partnership.
So, we've just got one covenant. There were two, weren't there, once?
Yeah, right away.
So, Luke, what's your involvement?
So this is the cabinet member for community engagement when it comes to this. I think the wording of the sort of housing partnership is slightly confusing because it does just cover rough sleeping and domestic abuse, not sort of the housing element that I cover. So my involvement in terms of this is covering for Rebecca. Is covering for Rebecca.
It's not his portfolio.
Housing.
Yes, that's why it's in the name.
You haven't had another switch around in cabinet responsibilities.
It's still the same.
So you're housing, but you don't know what your role is, or you haven't got a role.
This report is the Gloucestershire Housing Partnership, but that doesn't come under me. That comes under Rebecca for community engagement.
I was going to say, shall I answer Saj's question? Because I think there are a couple of things that I can give as examples of where we've made some improvements for different areas. So when we started to look at the outreach contract for rough sleeping, one of the things that was quite obvious was that having one service that covered all of Gloucestershire wasn't an effective way to kind of deliver the service. So what we actually agreed to do was to split it into a rural and an urban contract. So it was one contract with two lots, and potentially two different delivery partners could have won those contracts. In this case, one partner did win those contracts, but they're managed as two different contracts, so that Gloucester and Cheltenham get what they need as urban districts, and so that the other districts get what they need as rural districts, because rough sleeping looks quite different in those places. So I think that's one example. The other thing, which I think is probably a good example, is the closure of the Gloucester Somewhere Safe to Stay hub. So one of the things that we were finding, so there used to be a Somewhere Safe to Stay hub in Gloucester and one in Cheltenham, and one of the things that we were finding was that Gloucester's Somewhere Safe to Stay hub was predominantly full of people that weren't from Gloucester City, and given Gloucester's housing need, it was causing some issues. So actually the decision was taken to close the Gloucester hub. The Cheltenham one stayed open because it seemed to work differently, and Gloucester now has its own Gloucester City off the street offer, which is different to the hub model. So, I think, Gloucester's situation in terms of housing need is quite different, and quite often I've got to put a partnership hat on, but still try and make sure that Gloucester's needs are considered in the wider discussion. So it's not always an easy negotiation to have, but we do try and make sure, I think as districts in Gloucestershire, we do work really effectively together, and if we can't get a decision made, then I pull all the housing directors together to battle it out and work out a way forward, and it generally does seem to get some traction.
Can I just add, the partnership's been going since 2017, I believe, and by sort of pooling resources together, it sort of delivers better outcomes fundamentally for the residents. So one example of that is the places of safety, which we started off at having 12 units, and that's been able to grow because of pooling all our money up to 25 that we currently have, which provides a lot more flexibility, allows sort of pets that other places don't take, and lots of other sort of things around that. So yeah, pooling resources gives better outcomes.
I take Councillor Chambers. Do all the districts and the ICB and the Police and Crime Commissioner make a financial contribution?
They do. There's different contributions to different parts of different contracts. So, for example, the Police and Crime Commissioner doesn't contribute to all of them, but they do contribute to the outreach, the rough sleeping outreach one, for example, because it helps to meet some of their objectives. So, all of the different contracts are funded differently, some through external grants, some through partner contributions, but everybody contributes in some way to some of it.
So what would the financial turnover be of the partnership?
I don't have that to hand. Altogether, it is probably 1.5 million-ish, broken down across all of those 10 contracts. So, it is quite significant if you break them down.
So that's a huge amount, and I'm not sure where our involvement as elected members comes in terms of looking at benchmarking and outcomes and performance. And it looks to me, Luke, sorry to keep picking on you, but you're the only man standing. There's a bit of a democratic deficit here. And I don't, where are the meetings? Are the councillors, are we allowed to come and sit in on the meetings and go onto the website, look at the minutes, see what was discussed?
So the minutes of the partnership meeting aren't published. I mean, we are happy to share them. They're not secret, but a lot of the funding we get can only be spent on the things that we're spending them on. So, you know, there's not much debate or discussion to be had around how that money is spent. So, you know, Rough Sleeping Initiative money, for example, has to be spent in the way that MHCRG tell us that we can spend it. So, you know, I think opening up for, you know, we're more than happy to come and talk about different contracts and how they're performing. I mean, that would be a really good oversight item, I think, for this committee. But in terms of deciding how money is spent, if we've got grants that are ring fenced for certain things, then, you know, I don't necessarily think that would be a best use of members' time. And, you know, as Lucas said, he isn't the cabinet member for this work. Rough sleeping and domestic abuse sits with Rebecca as the cabinet member for community engagement. And she has been briefed on this, and she has, you know, she obviously took the decision around the domestic abuse strategy, for example. So she is briefed in the same way as the other cabinet members from the other districts on what's going on in the partnership.
I'm just wondering, looking around the committee, whether or not we want to look at this again with a little bit more information. We've got a turnover of 1.4 million, did you say?
So that was a hazarding a guess, but as it says in the report, we are looking to bring an annual report which covers all of the activity, spending, contracting, all that kind of stuff on an annual basis that will also be shared with all of the partners. So, you know, it will give, you know, there will be opportunity to give updates on more detail to this committee when those annual reports come back.
So one thing I do find is this is quite a lot of this partnership is very much operational delivery, which I would probably say does sit sort of outside of my remit and our remit, I suppose. So I think that's one thing to consider is the operational nature of this rather than any sort of decision making.
Okay, but does anybody else got any recommendations they think we ought to take to cabinet as a result of looking at this? So sorry, Angela.
No, Chair, my question's exactly around what you're raising. It's about delegation without limits.
Okay.
So my question's around delegation without limits, exactly what Councillor Gravels has raised. This report requests authority to accept funding, award contracts and amend the partnership agreement, or without returning to Cabinet for approval. So basically, they can do what they want as they want with the money without going back to Cabinet. What financial ceiling contract limit a safeguarding threshold is being applied? And if none exists, how can Cabinet justify signing away democratic oversight?
So all officers have maximum spending limits identified within the Constitution. So I can only take decisions up to a certain level anyway, and any decisions that I take under these delegated authorities will be published as officer decisions so that all members are able to see them. So, yeah, I mean, as I've said, this is cost neutral to the council, and there's a huge amount of commissioning that needs to happen over the next 2 years in advance of the LGR to avoid service breaks. So, you know, one of the reasons for delegating authority is to avoid the 3-month cycle of any decision making having to go through a cabinet process, which may delay a very long procurement, which has already happened, to avoid, you know, any delays in service. So, you know, I mean, we're not likely to take on any new contracts. It's going to be a case of extending the ones that we have. But, you know, I'm more than happy to add some limits into those delegated authorities to make sure it is no new contracts and only contracts that we're looking to extend for the purpose of LGR.
One more thing to add on 2.2, it might be delegated authority, but it's also in consultation with the cabinet member, whichever one might be relevant at the point of time. So there is that interaction between cabinet as well,
And the head of finance.
and the head of finance, which is the other important one.
And one legal.
And one, yeah, lots of people.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned provision for rough sleepers who have a dog. What about rough sleepers who are in a couple? I've come across one or two who would rather sleep rough because they can be together than be split up and go into accommodation that we've offered.
It's always challenging when it comes to housing, or anybody, to be fairly frank, whether it's rough sleepers or not. There are provision when it comes to pets is challenging, and provision when it comes to couples is also equally difficult. I believe the next step accommodation allows for couples, I believe, as do certain other ones. There isn't enough provision for all of that. We could do with more. But I think we've got the best that we can currently get. I don't know if you've got anything more to add to that.
I think one of the challenges, particularly with couples, is if there's domestic abuse present, then it's difficult to house them together, because obviously we've got a duty of care to the decision we make in their housing and how we support them. So, you know, it is a really difficult one with couples. Quite often the couples are housed, but because they can't have their partner come and stay, they then choose to rough sleep even though they're in accommodation. So, you know, Housing First is the best way probably to meet those needs, but Housing First properties are in very short supply. It is a project that this team are trying to expand as much as possible, but, you know, definitely recognise that couples are really challenging for a whole variety of reasons.
Can I just clarify, what's next step? Is that the YMCA arrangement or another one, different?
Yeah, no, it's a different one. It's sort of the provision lower than that, I suppose, where they're not quite triggering the start accommodation, which is a bit more high level. G6 and P3. Yeah, G6 and P3 run it, but it's more for sort of low level support.
Okay, so as a committee, can we suggest that the Cabinet look at ways of increasing the democratic accountability of all of this work? Because I think there's a lack of involvement by members on a sum of £1 million plus. But nobody's nodding in agreement with me, so I think I'm flogging a dead horse, I think. Nobody's got concerns about that? Nope. Angela?
You're looking at me, so I'm assuming that you're after me. It's the Anne-Angela swap again, I'm afraid, Councillor Gravels. I had a quick question regarding SWEP, if it would be possible to pop it in before we move on.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you for fielding the questions. It's very, very decent of you to come and you, as it's not your cabinet area, you've answered a lot of the questions, so I'm very grateful for you for coming along and supporting. However, I have got residents in my ward who have a particular interest in SWEP, and they would like to know how well it's working, and they'd like to understand how it's meeting need. And I couldn't tell them what they needed to do to get that information and to understand the data. Where should I direct my resident who really wants to understand SWEP? Who should they talk to so they can get a really good feel for how it's working?
So I think it depends on what they mean by what the success of SWEP and the outcomes are, because SWEP is a humanitarian response to avoid death in bad weather. So in terms of how many people do we bring in during SWEP, you know, we can quite easily answer that question. In terms of the needs of those individuals and what they really need, that is usually a whole different question. And some of the rough sleepers, they only come in, some of them don't come in during SWEP. You know, they're not interested in the SWEP offer, they don't care about the weather, you know, whereas some will only come in during SWEP to safeguard their own health, and then they go back out and they don't want to engage again. So, you know, SWEP is an opportunity to engage. I think if you've got specific questions, somebody's got specific questions about SWEP, then happy for them to contact me and I can try and get some answers for them around, you know, levels of engagement and how many people are being housed in different SWEP episodes. I think we generally see a difference difference between rainy SWAP and cold SWAP. So again, different people take up offers in different ways for different reasons. But we have changed how we offer SWAP now because of the engagement opportunity. So we don't just put people in hotels now like we used to. We have a proper SWAP offer in a service with support, with engagement, and we try and make sure that everybody that we house during SWAP has a housing application, that they've engaged with the council, that we know about them, and we use it as an opportunity to make sure nobody's falling through the gaps.
Thank you, Ruth. I think it's those changes that they just want to have a bit more information about so they can see that it's working. I think they had concerns that they didn't quite understand the model, they didn't understand the change, and so they were thinking, well, it must be working, but they hadn't got any information to tell them that it was working. So I'll put them in contact. Thank you, Ruth.
If I can just add one thing. So my understanding with SWEP as well, just for your resident might be interested, is that some of the provision we have is mixed, but there's also dedicated only female provision as part of that. So that's another sort of good thing we're doing.
So can I just add as well, because it might be something that the committee want to look at. So we do a report on SWAP at the end of the SWAP period for all of the districts and kind of what the SWAP engagement has looked like. So it might be something that this committee want to look at as an oversight item is, what does SWAP look like on a year by year basis? There's obviously warm SWAP in the summer, which is a completely different kettle of fish. But I think over the winter, the SWAP period, it might be something that the committee is interested in.
Good note to end, I think. Nobody else wants to speak? No. Mr. Chambers, councillor, wants to speak.
Really quickly, I just went for my emails. I noticed that I've complained several times about Streetlink not working. On the 20th of the 11th, 2023, I reported 3 cases that didn't work. So it is something that needs to be looked into because it's obviously failing. If that's 4 times I've used it recently, I've got the emails here. I can prove that I've sent them. Cheers, thanks.
Yeah, so do send that on. I've never personally had any issues with Streetlink, and it is a national system, but, more than happy to pick up any concerns about it because it is what we direct everyone to report rough sleeping. So it's really important that it does what it needs to do. Thank you.
Hey, Angela or Anna, anybody? Anything to add? Or about that mistake again? Judge.
Yeah, just that last point, Chair, about the Streetlink not working. I mean, we've got all these partners who are supposed to be overseeing each other and making sure things work. So it shouldn't be down to members to be pointing things out, such as this, something so serious, where you've got homeless people, outside sleeping rough in the freezing cold. We should be proactive on this. If there is a problem, we should know about it. If somebody has contacted the council, we should make sure that it gets looked into. Perhaps there may be instances where someone sleeping rough has notified the relevant agency and they've just not bothered to follow up on it because, as far as they're concerned, the individual here is here in front of them, so my job's done. Does that make sense? So it's a brilliant example there where there are problems and no one's doing anything about it or spotted it until it comes to a meeting like this. So member oversight is really, really crucial as well. Thank you.
I'll just say, so when it comes to reporting sort of rough sleeping in any way, whether it's what happens through Streetlink, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to be given accommodation or they're going to all of a sudden move from rough sleeping onto something else. So I think it's quite often people might think that they're making the referral, and then all of a sudden it's going to fix the situation. So because lots of people are lots of complex characters, it's not quite an easy quick fix of just making a referral job done.
Sorry, in those sort of cases, there's no reason why we as elected members shouldn't take them up with the team here to find out what went wrong. There's no reason at all, is there? No reason at all, like you've just done.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's not the point of expecting them to have accommodation straight away, or that it's just somebody just to check on them. In some cases, I spoke to somebody, they've been in the same location, I was Streetling them at Checkers, the BMX track. They've been there 3 nights in the freezing cold where no one had checked on them. No one had even visited them, and they'd been in the same tent. And when I called up again to see why no one visited them, they said they weren't there. And I went there every morning to check they were there, and they were there at 6:30, 7 o'clock and 7 o'clock. So checks weren't being done. So it does need looking at. And like Sarge said, it's all very well bringing stuff to meetings like this, but things need to be done. So I'd appreciate sort of like something urgent, not come to the next scrutiny meeting in 3 months' time to find that we've still got the same issue.
Sure, if I may, the other problem I've come across as well is if I've reported someone who's homeless, who's living in a tent in my ward and in a car park, and I reported it, there's no follow-up from me or to me to find out what's happened. In one case, I was like Councillor Chambers, I regularly visited that car park, and the individual had gone. I had no idea where he'd gone, whether he just moved to a different location, whether he'd been housed into sheltered accommodation. And then a couple of weeks later, I received a complaint from a resident saying, the homeless person is still here. So I went over there to have a look. And I spoke to the gentleman, engaged with him, and it turned out he was a different individual. It was his friend that was a guy who was there last time on his own, so he'd been helped. This guy was out at the time, so he'd been missed, and he was there a few weeks later, and then I reported him as well, and hopefully he got help. But there's no follow-up to find out what happens to that individual in terms of whether they have been spoken to or engaged with. That should be the minimum, I would have thought. So if reports it, get some feedback to say the individual has been contacted and has been spoken to.
Really urgently, just on that note, where Sarge said that he was in the tent, then he couldn't see him, and then the resident said that he was still there.
Yeah, sure.
I found out a protocol that the council's got where they've been stealing the homeless people's tents. They've been removing them without permission. It is a policy. So people in doorways, they leave their tent there, and the next thing the council's removed their tents from doorways. So not only these people remaining homeless, they're not being street linked. The council are, and that is a policy. Is definitely a policy, 100% a policy to remove tents from the homeless. They did it on Robinswood Hill. They've done it in the centre of town. They've done it at the people in Clark's. They do it. And the council are fully aware of that. I swear on my children's lives, I know that's a fact. I swear to God.
Ruth, just quickly, I'm conscious that at 8:30 we have to have a show of hands whether or not to continue.
Okay, shall I just respond and then I
If
think
you can
we
respond
probably-
quickly, yeah.
Yeah, no problems. So I think in terms of street link, so I misunderstood. I thought what Councillor Chambers was saying that it wasn't working, the system wasn't working, rather than people weren't being checked on. So apologies for that. So you can tick a box on street link to say you want to be given information about the individual that you've reported once they've been visited, and I always do that because it means that you get some kind of comeback. If there are concerns by members about any commissioned services, the first step is to complain to the commissioned organisation. So if you're concerned about the performance of Julian House staff, you need to complain to Julian House. The next step is that the complaint would go to the commissioners, which is the housing partnership team, to look into as the commissioners of that contract. So, we take these things really seriously, and we would encourage you to follow up if you are concerned, because otherwise we're not able to take any action as commissioners, and we're not able to enable the service to make improvements. So that would be my kind of advice on that.
Are we happy to continue? Do you want to continue or do you want to stop now?
I want to find out about these stolen tents.
Shall I reply to the stolen tents first? So tents will only be removed if they're unoccupied, and we will try and double check for a couple of days that they're unoccupied. But if they're not somewhere they should be and they are a mess in a public place, they will be treated as a fly tip. So there is about to be a consultation on our encampments policy, which members are more than encouraged to feed into. And that is about several tents being together and the impact on the community. But if tents are inhabited, they will not be removed. The response will be engagement with those individuals.
I got 15 tents last Christmas, myself and Brendan. We issued them out to the homeless and rough sleepers. Within 2 or 3 days, I saw them and asked why they're just in the sleeping bags about a pop-up tent. And they said they left it in the doorway for literally 10 minutes to go and use the toilet. When the local shops had let them use the toilet, and by the time they come back, the tent had gone. And they've been informed that the council had removed it. And that was quite a lot of people that's happened to. So it is worrying. I think proper due diligence needs to be done on before tents are removed to make sure people have got somewhere to stay that night, because it is.
Can we capture that in our report to cover that?
Strong a bit away from you.
Say again?
Okay, we need to take a vote whether we continue or whether we finish now because it's 8:30. We continue for a few more minutes. Anybody like to put their hand up if they think we should continue? Three of us. Those for ending now.